Most people spend their entire lives convinced they chose their own values. They believe their sense of right and wrong was born inside them, in some intimate place, after a great deal of sincere reflection. They believe their humility is character, their patience is virtue, their kindness is nature. And it's precisely this conviction, silent and rarely examined, that holds the adult life of most human beings upright. To take away this conviction is to take away the ground beneath them. That's why almost nobody looks down. Friedrich Nietzsche looked. In 1887, in a book called On the Genealogy of Morals, he described where these values came from. He showed that they weren't born inside anyone, they were installed. And he showed who installed them, when, and why. What this book does, when read seriously, is a delicate operation. It takes the morality that Western man inherited, opens up its chest, and shows where each of its organs came from. It shows that humility and virtue were inventions of specific people, at a specific moment, for a specific reason. It shows that suffering is noble and was sold by those who needed to turn defeat into merit, that pride is a defect and was propaganda from those who had nothing to be proud of. And it shows, without fanfare, that a good portion of what the reader calls being a good person is nothing more than obedience learned very early and never revised. Who hasn't looked at certain people and felt a certain envy, the kind you don't confess out loud? People who live with little, who don't depend on the opinions of others, who don't apologize for existing, who say what they think without rehearsing it first, and who, even without showing off anything, seem to have something the rest of the world lost somewhere along the road. It's not money, it's not beauty, it's not luck. It's a kind of inner axis that modern man has been trained to abandon before the age of 20. Meanwhile, on the other side of the screen, someone is lying on the couch at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, with the blue light of the phone hitting their face, with the credit card bill that arrived by email that afternoon open in another tab, and with that feeling that can't quite be named. It's not physical exhaustion. It's the exhaustion of existing the way they've been existing. It's the slow realization that the life they built, seen from the outside, looks correct, and lived from the inside, is unbearable. It's the exhaustion of pretending to agree in meetings that don't matter, of laughing at jokes they don't find funny, of maintaining relationships that hold together by inertia, of defending opinions they don't even remember how they acquired. It's not weakness. It's the soul breathing under the weight of a morality that never belonged to the one carrying it. So follow along with me here. This is more or less how Michael came across the book. Michael was 38 years old, lived on the outskirts of Chicago, worked as an operations executive at a logistics company, earned a good salary, had a 12-year marriage, a dog, a gym membership he used religiously 4 times a week, voted in every election, separated his recycling, made donations to a local charity every Christmas, and was described by colleagues, neighbors, and family, without exception, as a good person. The problem was that Michael woke up every morning with an exhaustion that no weekend could cure. It wasn't clinical depression. His therapist had ruled that out. It was something else. It was the continuous sensation of inhabiting a life that seemed to have been chosen by someone else in his name. It was the quiet discomfort of someone who recognizes himself in the mirror, but not in the life story he tells about himself. Until one of Michael's friends, before moving permanently to Lisbon, showed up at his apartment one Thursday night and left a single book on the kitchen counter, wrapped in brown paper. On top of the paper, written by hand in black pen, was a single sentence. "You were never good. You were just obedient. Read this." The book was On the Genealogy of Morals. Michael opened the book expecting abstract philosophy, the kind you flip through once and abandon. What he found was something else entirely. Right in the opening pages of the first essay, Nietzsche asks a question that seems simple and that destroys an entire mental edifice if taken seriously. Where did what we call good come from? Not good in some abstract sense, good in the moral sense. Goodness as virtue, humility as quality, detachment as nobility, patience as character. Where did all this come from? The traditional answer, inherited from centuries of religious and philosophical tradition, would be that these values came from somewhere universal, eternal, natural, that it has always been this way, that it's inscribed in the human soul, in conscience, in reason, in some transcendent realm outside of time and space. Nietzsche dismantles this in just a few pages, and his method is what gives the work its surgical character. He does genealogy, and genealogy in the Nietzschean sense is the exact opposite of traditional metaphysics. Instead of asking about the eternal essence of a value, he asks about its concrete history. Instead of looking for where morality is grounded in a timeless heaven, he traces the ground where it was buried and planted by human hands, under human conditions, with human purposes. He shows that there was a time, a documented historical time, when good meant exactly the opposite of what it means today. Good was strong, good was noble. Good was the one who affirmed his own existence without asking permission. Good was the one who had power and used that power without guilt. And bad, in that time, was simply what was below, what was weak, what depended, what submitted. There was no moral charge in this. It was descriptive. It was like saying that an eagle is good at flying and a lamb is bad at flying. Nobody condemns the lamb for that. Nobody moralizes about flight. Nature simply distributes capacities, and capacities simply are what they are. Nietzsche does a philological analysis, almost linguistic, of the words used for good and bad in ancient cultures. He shows, with references to Greek, to Latin, to Gothic, to archaic German, that the etymological roots of the words associated with good carry, in their origin, meanings related to light, brightness, height, strength. The words associated with bad, in their oldest root, describe the common, the simple, the low, what is beneath. In other words, the moral vocabulary of Western man was born as a vocabulary of class, of hierarchy, of position. Morality was, at its birth, a mirror of social stratification. The strong called themselves good because they were strong. The weak were called bad because they were weak. And here it's important to understand exactly what Nietzsche means by weak, because this word runs through the entire work and is usually misunderstood. Weak, in Nietzsche, is not the humble, poor, or modest person in the common sense. It's something more specific. It's the one who, feeling unable to affirm his own life through direct action, redirects that blocked energy onto the terrain of morality, and there, under the disguise of virtue, does what he couldn't do in the world. Weak, in this technical sense, is the one who uses moral judgment as a substitute for the strength he couldn't exercise. The resentful man is weak in this sense, and nothing more. And this naming involved no condemnation, no guilt, no moral judgment in the sense the term would later acquire. It was simple observation. What changed over the centuries was the entrance onto the stage of something new, a will coming from below to reverse this equation. Not by force, because force wasn't on the bottom side, but by language, by narrative, by morality. The next question Nietzsche asks is the one that changes everything. How then, at some point in history, did these meanings get inverted? How did humility become a virtue and pride become a sin? How did suffering become noble and desire become dirty? How did obedience become character and self-affirmation become arrogance? Who pulled off this inversion? Who benefited from it? And why does nobody seem to notice it happened? Michael read this passage 3 times on the first night. Then he closed the book, went to the kitchen, drank a glass of water, and stared at the window for about 20 minutes. He wasn't shocked. He was feeling the ground move slowly beneath him, like someone realizing for the first time that he had been standing his entire life on an unstable platform and had never noticed. Nietzsche calls this inversion the transvaluation of values, and historically locates it as the product of a long process that begins in specific environments of the ancient world and runs through the entire Western moral tradition. He describes this process as a spiritual revenge carried out by those who, unable to win by force, won by narrative. Without the material conditions to defeat those on top, they did something more subtle and infinitely more durable. They rewrote the ruler. They changed the criteria by which success and defeat would be measured. They decreed that the strong was evil, that the powerful was a sinner, that the noble was arrogant. And, simultaneously, they decreed that the weak was good, that the humble was holy, that the sufferer was blessed. With this, they achieved an extraordinary victory. Without lifting a finger in the physical realm, they transferred all the moral prestige to their own side. And once moral prestige shifts, everything else, sooner or later, follows. Because human beings, to a large extent, organize their lives around what they consider worthy, and worthy is what the dominant morality says is worthy. This is where the first crack opens in the life of anyone who takes Nietzsche seriously. The discovery that what was considered a universal value is, in fact, a historical product. And like every product, it was manufactured, distributed, and sold. And like every mass-marketed product, it was sold mainly to those who most needed to buy it. Nietzsche is clear about who bought and who sold. Those who couldn't win in the arena of strength, of courage, of self-affirmation, created a new arena where the criteria would be inverted. An arena in which being weak became merit, in which failing to act became patience, in which having nothing to desire became detachment, in which failing to react became forgiveness. It was a brilliant marketing operation, carried out over centuries, and so successful that today most people play this game without even realizing they're playing it. They think they're being good. They're just being defeated and calling defeat virtue. Michael returned to the book the following night and reached the concept that would change his entire life: ressentiment. Nietzsche uses this word in French, ressentiment, because it carries a texture that no German equivalent captured. It's not anger. Anger is direct. It goes from the chest out into the world, explodes, passes, leaves exhaustion behind, but it passes. Ressentiment is something else. It's the anger that couldn't come out. It's the frustration that got stuck inside someone who feels powerless in the face of life, and who, without the courage or means to transform that powerlessness into action, transforms it into moral judgment. The resentful person doesn't want to rise. He wants whoever rose to come down. He doesn't want to be happy. He wants nobody to look happy in front of him. He doesn't want to build. He wants to tear down whoever built, so the ground becomes flat again and he doesn't have to look up. And the most disturbing detail, the one Nietzsche makes a point of showing, is that the resentful person sincerely believes he's a good person while doing this. His morality is the perfect alibi. He envied, so he called envy a sense of justice. He feared, so he called fear prudence. He couldn't act, so he called inaction spiritual superiority. There's a technical detail in Nietzsche worth highlighting because it explains why ressentiment is so long-lasting and so hard to detect inside oneself. The resentful person doesn't act, he reacts. His entire existence is oriented not by what he wants, but by what he's against, by what he hates, by what he envies, by what he despises. His identity isn't built by affirming himself, but by negating others. He needs the other to exist. Without the strong, the resentful person dissolves. Without someone to feel morally superior to, he doesn't know who he is. That's why, in any environment, in any era, it's easy to identify someone operating from ressentiment. Just a few minutes of conversation is enough. The person talks more about what they hate than about what they love. They define themselves more by what they reject than by what they affirm. They have clear enemies and vague proposals. They know exactly who should lose, but they don't quite know what they themselves want to win. It's a profile that repeats with small variations in every era, in every social environment, in every ideology. Left, right, religion, atheism, fitness, self-help. Ressentiment has no party. It has a method. Showing this force in action in today's world is almost unnecessary because it's everywhere. It's on the social network where someone posts an achievement and receives 30 comments loaded with formal compliments laced with a fine poison underneath. It's in the workplace where a colleague gets promoted and the entire group starts discussing, in hallways and over coffee, how unfair that promotion is, how suspicious, how undeserved. It's in family conversations where the cousin who got rich becomes a subject always brought up in a moral tone, as if prospering were some kind of ethical failure that needs to be explained. It's in anonymous internet comments, an environment where ressentiment has found its perfect medium, because it can operate without a face and without consequence. And it is, with absolute certainty, somewhere inside whoever is watching right now. Not as an exception, but as a pattern. Ressentiment is, according to Nietzsche, the standard emotional currency of modernity. And most people use this currency dozens of times a day without noticing. Michael read this and had to take a pause. He got up from the couch, went to the bathroom mirror, and stood there looking at himself. There were no tears, no drama. There was recognition, that specific kind of silent recognition nobody wants to have. How many of his firmest opinions were born in a place inside him he preferred not to examine? How many times had he morally condemned someone who had simply managed to get something he wanted? How many times had he called unjust what was simply inaccessible to him? The question was too uncomfortable to be answered all at once, but it had been asked. On the Genealogy of Morals is divided into 3 essays, and Nietzsche structures the work as a climb. The first essay opens the wound. The second deepens it. The third turns the knife. In the second essay, he introduces a concept that may be the most disturbing of the entire book: bad conscience. The idea, in simple terms, is this. There was a moment in human history when man, living in increasingly organized communities, was forbidden from discharging his instincts outward. He could no longer attack, dominate, conquer, expand freely. The instincts didn't disappear. They just lost their direction. And when an instinct has no external outlet, it turns inward. Man began to do to himself what he could no longer do to the world. He began to judge himself. He began to punish himself. He began to feel guilt for desiring what he desired, pleasure for what he felt, anger for what he thought. A new creature appeared in history, a creature no other animal knows, a creature that apologizes for existing, that hates itself in silence, that carries an internal voice constantly telling it that it's not enough, not good, doesn't deserve, isn't up to the standard. Nietzsche describes this process with a metaphor worth imagining carefully. He says that man became an animal that carries the tamer inside himself. Before, the tamer was outside. It was the community, it was authority, it was the priest, it was custom. Little by little, this tamer was internalized. It was installed as an automatic mechanism, and now it operates all the time, without anyone needing to watch from outside. Modern people don't need police to repress themselves. They have internal police in continuous operation. They don't need authority to feel guilty. Guilt comes on its own, punctual, efficient, every time something inside tries to assert itself directly. This is, according to Nietzsche, one of the most decisive events in human history. It wasn't small. It was the domestication of the human animal by itself. And not everyone agrees that this domestication was an advance. For Nietzsche, it's one of the greatest diseases the species has ever contracted. This creature is inside whoever is watching this video. It's inside Michael. It's inside me. It's that voice that shows up on a Friday night after a hard week of work and says that resting is laziness. It's that voice that sabotages any more intense joy by reminding you that suffering exists in the world. It's that voice that whispers that feeling good is selfishness, that wanting more is greed, that saying no is coldness, that setting limits is cruel. Nietzsche is clear about this. This voice is not the person's conscience. This voice is the herd speaking from inside. It's collective morality installed as internal software, running 24 hours a day, monitoring, judging, punishing. And the most perverse part is that the person believes this voice is themselves. They believe they're being honest with themselves when in fact, they're just reproducing a verdict that others issued about them long ago, and that they've started issuing on their own to save the world the trouble. There's a point that deserves special attention. Nietzsche isn't saying that every form of internal self-evaluation is bad conscience, nor is he saying that reflection, genuine self-criticism, the capacity to recognize one's own mistakes, is pathology. On the contrary, he himself is perhaps the most self-critical thinker in the Western tradition. What he identifies as pathology is something else. It's the self-criticism that doesn't come from the person themselves, that wasn't born from their own experience with life, but was installed from outside and keeps running inside without ever having been examined by them. It's the voice that passes itself off as conscience, but which, if examined, reveals itself to be just the tired repetition of old verdicts. Parents, churches, schools, mass culture, algorithms, all these agents, over the course of a lifetime, deposit inside the person a set of automatic commands. These commands then operate as if they were the person, and the person spends their life obeying themselves, without realizing they're obeying strangers they never were. It's worth pausing here. This video is a door. Crossing the door requires something else, and whoever wants to actually cross it will find it in the first pinned comment. Michael kept reading, and what came next was worse. Nietzsche shows that at some point in history, suffering was rebranded. It stopped being just what it is, an unpleasant experience to be avoided, and started being treated as proof of something. Proof of character, proof of seriousness, proof of depth. Those who suffer came to be considered more noble than those who enjoy themselves. Those who sacrifice came to be considered morally superior to those who take care of themselves. Those who deny themselves came to be considered more spiritualized than those who allow themselves. And this, which seemed to be a characteristic only of old religious eras, survived intact in modern culture, just changing its clothes. Today, nobody needs to believe in heaven and hell anymore to reproduce the same pattern. Modern man trades old religion for new religions: productivity, fitness, hustle culture, personal optimization, constant evolution. Always the same underlying mechanism. Punish yourself to feel worthy. Deny yourself to seem serious. Exhaust yourself to seem valuable. Michael did the math that night, with an open notebook on the living room table and the lamp turned low. It wasn't a spiritual accounting, it was raw arithmetic. 14 years in a career he chose at 22 because his parents would approve, because business school was a family tradition, because stepping outside, that meant disappointing people he loved. 6 years in his second marriage, sustained not by desire, but by a vague sense that ending it would be wrong, would be selfish, would be unjust to the other person, would be failure. Approximately 11,000 hours, a quick calculation, spent in meetings, dinners, calls, and family gatherings agreeing with opinions that weren't his to avoid friction, to keep the peace, to be polite. About 4,500 hours absorbing content from social media, news, and podcasts that the algorithm delivered to him based on what he clicked most and that he accepted over the years as his own thinking. When he added it all up, calmly, without dramatizing, he arrived at a number he preferred not to look at again. Roughly 18 years of adult life paid as a toll to a herd that wouldn't even notice his absence if he disappeared tomorrow. He closed the notebook and sat there, motionless, without reacting, for maybe an hour. Whoever is on the other side of the screen may be doing their own math right now, in silence. They don't need to tell anyone. They don't even need to put it on paper. But the math is being done. And what he read the following night was worse than everything he had read up to that point. There's a finding from contemporary social psychology that fits very well with what Nietzsche described without any data, just by observing human beings in the 19th century. Researcher Sherry Turkle from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology has been documenting for more than 2 decades the impact of prolonged exposure to digital environments on people's inner lives. In Reclaiming Conversation, published in 2015, she shows how the continuous presence of screens is eroding, year after year, the capacity to sustain internal conversation in silence, the kind of solitary thinking that has historically been the raw material of any mental autonomy. Without this internal silence, what enters in its place is external noise, at high volume and in continuous flow. And here another mechanism comes in, described long before the digital era. Social psychologist Robert Zionk, in studies published starting in 1968 in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, demonstrated what became known as the mere exposure effect, the simple repetition of a stimulus without any additional reinforcement. makes the human brain associate that stimulus with familiarity and with a more positive attitude. And later research, conducted by Lynn Hasher and colleagues in 1977, showed that this familiarity generated by repetition also converts into a sense of truth. It's what became known as the illusory truth effect. Familiarity becomes the feeling of truth. The feeling of truth becomes opinion. Opinion becomes identity. Contemporary studies on digital exposure have reapplied this effect to social media consumption, with consistent results. The human brain has no reliable mechanism to distinguish between what it actually thought and what it has simply read many times. Nietzsche saw this mechanism without needing scientific apparatus. Today, science only confirms what he described as the herd. Michael got to the third essay of On the Genealogy of Morals more slowly than he had gotten through the first two. Each paragraph demanded a pause. In this third essay, Nietzsche dissects what he calls the ascetic ideal and describes with relentless clarity the mechanics behind every form of self-denial that presents itself as nobility. Michael recognized himself in every line. The modern obsession with optimizing oneself, the cult of productivity that turns every free minute into guilt, the moralization of effort, where exhaustion is displayed on social media like a medal, the compulsive reading of self-help books like someone participating in a new religion without an altar, the social status given to those who sleep less, train more, earn more, feel less. All of this, Nietzsche shows, is the same old engine, just in new clothes. The body is no longer denied in the name of God. The body is denied in the name of other things, in the name of work, in the name of the goal, in the name of the project, in the name of the image. The engine is identical, using exhaustion as proof of existence, feeling valuable to the extent that you suffer. Buying dignity with fatigue. The third essay is perhaps the most underestimated part of the work. Many readers stop at the first essay, satisfied with the diagnosis of master morality and slave morality. Others go through the second and get spooked by bad conscience. Few make it through the entire third. But it's in the third essay that Nietzsche performs the most delicate operation of the book. He shows why the ascetic ideal, that is, the idea that one must renounce life in the name of something greater than life, is so efficient that it has survived intact through the cultural changes of the last centuries. It survived the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution. It survived the decline of institutional religions, the rise of modern science. And the reason for this survival in Nietzsche's reading is simple and brutal. The ascetic ideal offers human beings something that almost no other system offers: meaning, an answer to the hardest question of all, the question of what you're living for. Whoever accepts the ascetic ideal receives, for free, a direction, a purpose, a justification for their own suffering. And this, according to Nietzsche, is something human beings cannot do without. They would rather will the void than not will anything. They would rather suffer with meaning than live without direction. Nietzsche's exact phrase at the end of the third essay is one of the most quoted in the entire work. Man would rather will the nothing than not will. And that's why the ascetic ideal is so hard to root out. It's not enough to prove that it's a trap. You have to offer something else in its place. And in the absence of that something else, even those who saw the trap stay inside it, because leaving without a replacement seems worse than staying. Michael closed the book for the 5th time and realized, sitting in the dark of his living room at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, something he had never put into words. He wasn't living, he was charging himself. His entire life had been a continuous billing, in monthly installments, of a debt he never took on. And he had paid this debt with exemplary punctuality, without ever asking himself to whom he owed it. There's a connection here worth making, because it helps explain why this philosophy from the late 19th century remains so current, more than 130 years later. The Korean-German philosopher Byung-Chul Han, in works like The Burnout Society, originally published in German in 2010, describes contemporary man as the achievement subject. Unlike the obedience subject of earlier eras, who is repressed by a visible external authority, the achievement subject is repressed by himself. he's his own exploiter. He's his own judge, his own executioner, his own jailer. Nothing is explicitly forbidden anymore. Everything is, in theory, permitted. And precisely because of this, modern man wears himself out to the limit. Because there's no longer an external figure to rebel against. The cage has gone internal. Han is, to a large extent, updating Nietzsche for the 21st century. And the basic diagnosis remains the same. Contemporary man is, to a large extent, an animal that continuously domesticates itself and that mistakes this domestication for virtue, for character, for identity. When someone starts applying Nietzsche, even in small doses, the world around them reacts. And it reacts much sooner than you'd expect. Michael hadn't said anything to anyone about the book. He hadn't posted anything on social media. He hadn't changed careers, hadn't asked for a divorce, hadn't cut off relationships. He just started making small adjustments, staying silent instead of automatically agreeing, no longer laughing at a joke he had never found funny, declining an invitation he would have accepted out of obligation, taking a little longer to reply to messages, small things, internal, almost imperceptible. And yet, within a few weeks, the world started to notice. His wife thought he was distant. His best friend asked if he was depressed. His boss mentioned in private that he had been carrying himself with an arrogant attitude. His mother called worried, wanting to know if something had happened. Nobody presented arguments against anything he said or did. Nobody needed to. The pressure was social, not rational. It was the sideways glance. It was the subtle distancing. It was the silent label. Difficult, cold, arrogant, strange, lost, changed. The explanation for this reaction is older than Nietzsche, but he articulates it with remarkable precision in various passages On the Genealogy of Morals, and in other works, like Beyond Good and Evil, published in 1886. The point is simple. Every community, whatever its size or shape, depends for its cohesion on a certain quantity of tacit obedience from its members. Not explicit obedience to written rules. Tacit obedience to a climate of continuous agreement in which each person confirms, through small daily gestures, that they belong to the group and accept its silent rules. When someone starts disobeying this climate, even without violating any written rule, the group feels it. It feels it because its cohesion depends on this continuous confirmation. And it feels it because, inside each member of the group, there's an echo of what the disobedient person just did. Every time someone close says no where they used to say yes, those around them hear inside themselves the possibility of also saying no. And that possibility is, for most, unbearable. So they react to close the door before it opens completely. They react with a look, with a comment, with distancing, with an improvised psychological diagnosis, with sincere concern disguised as care. Nietzsche had warned, with the clarity of someone who lived it firsthand. The first thing to be sacrificed by someone who starts thinking for themselves is the approval they received for not thinking. The life of the philosopher is, to a large extent, a life of withdrawn approval. And whoever has never gone through a few months with approval withdrawn doesn't know the real weight of that. Human beings are, above all, social animals. And the withdrawal of approval activates circuits in the brain similar to those of physical pain. This isn't an exaggeration. It's basic neuroscience, documented in studies like those of researcher Naomi Eisenberger from the University of California, Los Angeles, who demonstrated in research published in the journal Science starting in 2003 that social rejection activates the same brain regions activated by bodily pain, particularly the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. That's why it's so hard. That's why almost nobody goes all the way. Leaving the herd hurts, in the literal sense of the word, and the herd counts on this to keep you inside. What Nietzsche offers, and this is what sets his work apart from so many other thinkers who merely criticized conventional morality, is a psychological understanding of why the silent collective exists and why it works so well. The herd isn't stupid, it isn't weak, it isn't bad. It's an extraordinary evolutionary solution to a real problem. The problem of isolation, of exposure, of individual responsibility over each decision. Belonging to a tribe exempts the person from thinking about almost everything. It exempts them from choosing their own values, their own goals, their own meaning. All of this comes ready-made, supplied by culture, by the group, by tradition. In exchange for this exemption, the ambient consensus charges only one thing: conformity, showing up to the rituals, sharing the opinions, repeating the formulas, not destabilizing. The bargain is ancient, anthropologically solid, and works at minimum levels of functioning for most people most of the time. What Nietzsche points out isn't that the herd is useless. It's that the price charged is too high for whoever has realized what they're paying. And that, once the price is noticed, going back to the original bargain becomes existentially impossible, even if materially convenient. Here, perhaps, lies the hardest question Nietzsche asks his reader, and the one Michael ended up having to face lying on his back on a night when he couldn't sleep. The question is direct and fits on one line. What do I not do out of principle? And what do I not do out of fear disguised as principle? Applied with brutal honesty, this question destroys the castle of virtues in which most people live. Because, examined up close, calmly, without rushing, and especially without witnesses, almost every virtue reveals itself to be a well-fitted mask of a corresponding fear. The humility that's professed is, in most cases, fear of being judged if you shine too brightly. The patience so praised in relationships is, frequently, an inability to set limits. The generosity displayed in small gestures is, in significant part, a compulsive need to be loved and to not displease anyone. The honesty presented as a principle is, in many cases, just fear of being caught lying. The loyalty that's cultivated is, often, emotional dependence dressed up as character. Goodness is not in question. What's in question is calling goodness what is just fear in good clothing. Michael asked himself this question on a rainy Wednesday, after work, sitting in his car parked in front of the building where he lived. He didn't go upstairs for about 40 minutes. He couldn't. Every virtue he had collected over the course of his life, one by one, he mentally reviewed, and one by one, with a few genuine exceptions he managed to identify, most of them fell. His image of himself as a good husband was, in large part, fear of being alone. His image as a good son was, in large part, fear of disappointing people he loved. His image as a good professional was fear of not being valued, and his image as a good friend was fear of being excluded. It wasn't only that, but it was mainly that. And the worst part is that he had built an entire life on top of a self-image that couldn't withstand 30 minutes of honest inspection inside a car parked in the rain. Whoever is watching now can ask themselves the same question. They don't have to answer out loud. They don't have to tell even the closest person to them. But in silence, in the space between one breath and another, it's worth trying. Which of my virtues are principles and which are fears with a better name? Before continuing, something needs to be clarified that tends to be misunderstood by those who hear Nietzsche for the first time. Leaving the morality of the weak is not becoming cruel. It's not becoming selfish in the vulgar sense of the word, or becoming manipulative, calculating, cold, cynical, indifferent, despicable. That would just be reacting against general agreement in the opposite direction, and reaction is still dependence. Whoever acts to shock the group is still being led by the group. The freedom Nietzsche points to isn't in doing the opposite of what the crowd expects. It's in doing what something inside affirms, regardless of what the crowd expects, of what it approves, of what it condemns. The difference is subtle but decisive. Cruel is someone who needs to put others down to feel above them. Whoever affirms life doesn't need to bring anyone down to rise. They rise simply because they're no longer busy holding themselves down. And they also don't need to ask permission to rise. The key point of Nietzsche's work, and this becomes clear both in On the Genealogy of Morals and in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, is that there are two types of strength in the world. There's the strength that needs others to confirm itself, that needs to humiliate, that needs to dominate. that needs someone to be below for it to feel above. This is the strength of the newly freed slave, of the servant who became a master and still thinks like a servant, of the resentful man who gained power, but still measures life on the scale of envy. And there's the strength of the noble, which Nietzsche describes with a care that many people lose on first contact. The noble doesn't despise the weak. He doesn't even see them. He's busy affirming his own life, creating, building, expanding, and has no time or mental energy to compare himself to those left behind. Nobility, in the Nietzschean reading, isn't social hierarchy. It's internal hierarchy. It's the capacity to live from the inside out instead of living from the outside in. At this point, the most misunderstood notion in all of Nietzsche's work appears. The notion of the Übermensch, generally translated as Superman or Overman. To avoid all the popular misunderstandings accumulated over the 20th century, it's worth saying clearly what it is and what it isn't. The Übermensch is not a superior race. It's not a biological type. It's not a military conqueror. It has absolutely nothing to do with the appropriations that totalitarian regimes made of the concept decades after Nietzsche's death, largely through manipulations carried out by the philosopher's own sister, Elisabeth Förster Nietzsche, who controlled his estate and distorted his writings to align them with ideologies that Nietzsche himself, in life, condemned with unmistakable clarity in various letters and passages. The Nietzschean Übermensch is an existential figure. It's the human being who has managed to overcome himself, in the specific sense of overcoming the herdman inside himself. It's the one who stopped living in accordance with inherited values and began to create his own values, from his own experience, his own will, his own affirmation. It's not a finished type. It's a path. It's a direction. It's a vector pointing upward within one's own biography. Michael said no for the first time in his adult life, on a Sunday in October. It was a family gathering, one of those obligatory ones, his father-in-law's birthday, with the whole extended family together. There was no objective reason to skip. There was no trip. There was no work. There was no illness. He just didn't want to go. And for the first time in 14 years, he didn't make up an appointment. He didn't improvise an elaborate excuse. He didn't apologize 3 times in 3 different messages. He just wrote, in a single paragraph, that he wouldn't be able to attend that day, thanked them for the invitation, and sent a sincere hug. He gave no explanation. His mother found out that same afternoon and didn't speak to him for 2 weeks. His wife was irritated for 3 days. His father-in-law made an acid comment in the family group chat. Michael felt, throughout that entire period, an almost physical urge to call apologizing, to invent a retroactive excuse, to explain that it had been a misunderstanding, to fix everything somehow. But he didn't. He resisted out of pure exercise. And in the 3rd week, something that had been dormant inside him for years, maybe decades, started breathing again. It wasn't teenage rebellion. It was something much rarer and much harder to describe. It was the first choice that was really his in a long time. Here's a point that needs to be said clearly, because most philosophy courses, motivational videos, and popular adaptations of Nietzsche miss this point. Liberation from herd morality doesn't come in big spectacular gestures. It doesn't come in dramatically quitting your job, doesn't come in asking for a divorce in front of the whole family, doesn't come in moving to another country overnight. These gestures may happen, but their consequences, never the starting point. Real liberation begins with small, honest gestures, made in ordinary moments. It begins with a person who had been automatically saying yes for decades, and who suddenly pauses for 3 seconds before responding. It's in that 3-second pause that all the philosophy lives. There's a simple, practical structure that can be used by anyone who wants to start leaving the herd without causing an explosion in their own life. It's not a recipe. It's a 4-week schedule that serves as a starting point, as an exercise in internal muscle. Worth taking notes. The first week is for auditing your opinions. Grab a notebook and write down 10 strong opinions you defend in any area of life, whether politics, religion, money, relationships, work, aesthetics, or behavior. 10 positions you would put your hand in the fire for. Then, next to each one, write down when that idea first appeared in your life and through whom you arrived at it. Don't try to change anything, just look. This exercise alone tends to produce uncomfortable results, because most of what you defend with conviction was inherited, copied, or absorbed, and never actually examined. Some things are genuinely yours, but most aren't, and knowing the difference already changes a lot. The second week is for daily silence. 30 minutes a day, no phone, no music, no podcast, no television, no book, and no notebook. Just sit and stay, or walk and stay. The first thing that will come up, almost always, is boredom, then anxiety, and then something that was being smothered by the noise and that starts rising to the surface. It could be a memory, a postponed decision, a truth about a relationship, a stored up anger, and none of that matters in terms of content. The exercise isn't to produce anything, it's to let what's beneath the continuous noise finally come up to breathe. You probably won't make it through the whole week in the first month, and that's part of it. The third week is for your first no. Identify a single thing you do regularly out of pure fear of disapproval, whether it's a meeting, a Sunday lunch, a recurring favor, or an automatic response to a specific request, and decline that thing this week. No elaborate excuse, no 3-paragraph justification, no voice message explaining it 10 times, just a direct and civil no. Then observe. See what the people around you do. See what you yourself feel. Notice how long the discomfort lasts and what comes after it. The fourth week is for the decision that's yours. Not something big or spectacular that ruins your life, but a small choice, entirely yours, that nobody around you would make for you. It could be a purchase that seems pointless to others, a course with no obvious practical use, a solo weekend trip, a change in your appearance, or simply starting to write without showing anyone. The criterion is single. It has to be a decision that, if you told 10 acquaintances, at least 7 would react with a look of not understanding. It's not to shock, it's to recognize yourself. It's to feel in your body what it's like to do something that comes genuinely from inside, without needing external approval to stay standing. 4 weeks, 4 simple exercises. They won't change your life immediately, but they install an internal muscle that, once installed, doesn't uninstall. Whoever has gone through this path once knows they can do it again, and starts, slowly, to apply it to more areas of their own life. An important observation is worth making before moving on. Nietzsche is, in almost everything he wrote, a thinker who refuses formulas and is openly suspicious of ready-made recipes, self-help manuals, and anyone who offers a 4-step method to turn your life around. In works like Twilight of the Idols, written in 1888, shortly before the mental collapse that would definitively take him away from writing, he harshly mocks thinkers who promise quick salvation, short methods, and guaranteed transformation. The schedule you just received, therefore, doesn't pretend to be Nietzschean in the sense of following his style, but only a bridge, a temporary scaffold for anyone who has never exercised mental autonomy in adult life to have a concrete starting point. Once this minimum base is installed, the path no longer needs schedules, because you yourself start to invent your own tests, your own challenges, your own small ruptures. And the method delivered here becomes unnecessary, in the same way that bicycle training wheels become unnecessary after the first few laps around the block. 6 months after that first reading of On the Genealogy of Morals, Michael hadn't dramatically changed his life. He was still in the same job, although he was considering an internal transition to a more technical area, and although he still lived in the same apartment, he had stopped postponing a serious conversation with his wife that had been pushed forward for years. Relationships continued, but some had been silently distanced out of pure habit. From the outside, his life looked practically the same, but from the inside it was another, because the axis had moved. He had stopped living from the outside in, and had started, in small growing doses, to live from the inside out. It was the same life, but with a different owner, him. And this is where Nietzsche fulfills the function few thinkers fulfill. He doesn't sell salvation, doesn't promise happiness, and doesn't offer ready-made meaning, but only gives back, to whoever reads him seriously, something that had been confiscated for a long time: authorship of one's own life. What you do with that authorship afterward is your responsibility, but the act of receiving it back is, in itself, the greatest turning point possible in the biography of any ordinary human being. It's worth closing with an observation that tends to go unnoticed in popular readings of Nietzsche. He didn't write for those who are already strong. He wrote for those who are still under the weight and don't know they can get out. He wasn't interested in producing a manual for tyrants. He was interested in unlocking the gate for those who had been convinced, over the course of their lives, that the outside was forbidden. On the Genealogy of Morals, read calmly, without rushing, without searching for ready-made phrases to post, and without resorting to YouTube summaries, is one of the few books capable of performing this operation on you. The price of the reading is that you won't be the same person afterward, and that, perhaps, is the cheapest price anyone has ever paid in adult life for something truly decisive. And here, it's finally possible to answer the question that opens all of this. Man acts as a herd because the reason he uses every day is not his own. It was installed by the herd before he had the conditions to examine it, and it keeps running inside him on autopilot, deciding what is right, what is virtue, what deserves to be desired, what deserves to be feared. Aristotle defined man as the rational animal, and Nietzsche doesn't deny this. He just shows that the rationality that operates day to day is herd rationality, a reason that thinks within a morality it didn't choose. Man thinks, yes, but he thinks with the tools the herd installed. Rationality without authorship is just more elaborate obedience. Man is not rational because he thinks like everyone else. You are only rational, in the oldest and most demanding sense of the word, when you have the courage to think for yourself. And the courage to think for yourself is only half the path. The other half is the courage to live the consequences of what you thought. Most people think for a few moments and pull back, return to the comfort of agreement, to the warmth of the collective chorus, and accept the verdict of the crowd as if it were their own, spending their entire lives in the shadow of a decision they never actually made. A few others don't pull back. They pay the price, and they discover, without fanfare, that on the other side there's a way of breathing they had forgotten existed. If something in this video resonated with you, it's likely that something was recognized, and it's not worth ignoring. In the next 24 hours, start one single thing. Grab a notebook and write, in one line, the phrase that will stand as your inner commitment. I obeyed the herd for so many years, and I am beginning to disobey in such and such area. You don't need to publish it anywhere, you don't need to tell anyone, but if you want, leave in the comments what you think about this. I'll see you in the next video.